Good morning, everybody. A bit of a false start there. The music went very, very low, and I assumed that might be my cue. Thankfully, I have just been given one, and so I believe we are ready to start. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for making the effort to come here once again for the third year of the Social Value Summit. Absolutely wonderful to be working with our partners, our long-term partners, Interserve, and to be joined this year with our new supporting partner, Business in the Community. So over the course of today, we will be exploring whether social value is indeed coming of age. Obviously, it's a great idea, and I think everybody can get behind it, which is why this agenda has been continuing to grow at such a pace. However, against the backdrop of many, many challenges, ongoing austerity and public sector cuts, particularly pressure on housing, health and social care and education, means that sometimes for many social value is a nice to have, not a must to have. However, increasingly we are seeing leaders around the country, be they civic leaders or business leaders or other sector leaders, coming together and actually recognising that by being smart, by looking at partnerships rather than transactions, there is an opportunity to reorganise the way we deliver services and actually get much more bang for our buck. Clearly progress has been made, and indeed this agenda seems to be with us in the long term. I'm not sure any of you were here 3 years ago at the very first Social Value Summit. Was anyone here 3 years ago down in Dartington? Okay, 4 or 5 or 6. Great. Last year we were at the wonderful Coin Street Community Builders, where we were sold out and had a waiting list. And so this year we've upgraded the venue, and here we are at the BMA. Right in the middle of a current political storm with the Department of Health and NHS England and junior doctors. A fitting place, I think, for us to be discussing the importance of social value here today. Across today there are some really, really very, very interesting workshops. Some of my favourite topics, such as the role of big data, the role of commissioning in an age of austerity, looking at international interest. I was just mentioning to my guests, Adrian Ringrose from Interserve and Stephen Howard from Business in the Community, about the amount of international interest we're beginning to see. International delegations of ministers beginning to look at whether the Social Value Act can be applied in countries like India and Canada, very, very important markets for big companies and small businesses alike. One of the big themes that's emerging as I think the political landscape continues to evolve and shift is actually whether this agenda will ever favour the small. And so a particular workshop that's piqued my interest later today is entitled David versus Goliath. Does the social value agenda linked with devolution favour large businesses rather than small? Certainly our data from last year suggests that those social enterprises that are trading at probably over the £1 million mark are kind of doing better than those that are trading below that benchmark of £1 million. And of course we need to ensure that if we're going to create greater equity within our communities, that actually supply chains do engage and welcome and encourage smaller businesses also to be part of those supply chains. Devolution is a big subject, and we know that as we begin to see the northern powerhouse become established, that there are real challenges around commissioning and procurement being upscaled, potentially leaving some of the smaller organisations that have been embedded within communities possibly behind. And of course we know of the ongoing and exciting challenging times that the need to monitor and evaluate and account for social value pose. Can accountants change the world? Well, Tim Hayward from Interserve tells me indeed they are the only people who ever have. I'm not sure I would go along with that, but certainly accountants will play an increasingly pivotal role as we absolutely analyse and crunch the figures and start to explore different ways of accounting for social value. We'll of course be looking at the role of procurement throughout the whole of today. The power of the progressive procurement professional, that's P cubed. Over the last year we've seen the profession begin to redefine themselves as modern day superheroes, and about time too. Later on today we've got the inaugural Social Value Awards, and we've got the Minister Rob Wilson, Minister for Civil Society, joining us later on today to recognise some great work And as a judge, along with, I think some of my fellow judges are here today, what was really refreshing was the number of nominations coming from just about every part of kind of society, from the public sector, from the voluntary and community sector, from commissioning and from social value, procurement, officials too. A real breadth of inspiration at a time when we need it most. A really diverse range of approaches taken to driving social value into all parts of commissioning and procurement and trying to make a radical difference in very, very difficult and challenging times. I've already touched on the role of accountants and procurement managers within the realm of social value. However, we must also remember the role of great leadership. And I'm joined on the stage today by two, I think, great leaders, and I'm sure you'll agree, people that have really, really been encouraging business to take a very, very different approach to their relationship with society and indeed community. A little later on, we'll be hearing from Stephen Howard, a good friend and ally of Social Enterprise UK and this whole agenda, who has been really leading the charge and supporting many, many corporates in many, many diverse areas of our economy to take a fresh look at how they can deliver better value within our communities, neighbourhoods and for our country. Stephen has recently announced his retirement from business in the community, but almost immediately took on a very new and bold challenge, which is the leadership of the Power to Change Trust, where he's recently been announced as the new chair. Congratulations, Stephen, and we're looking forward to working with you in that role. But first, we're listening to Adrian, and Adrian Ringrose, I think, has shown some genuine, insightful understanding of how this agenda can benefit not only his business, but British society at large, and actually beyond British society, obviously as Interserve works in many, many international markets too. Interserve have been pioneering this with Social Enterprise UK and many other partners to really, really understand the opportunities that exist within the new realm of commissioning and procurement, devolution, outsourcing, and actually Interserve have been a really credible and valuable partner to Social Enterprise UK over the last 3 or 4 years. So with no further ado, it's my delight actually to introduce Adrian to the podium to hear and to share some of his words of wisdom about where the social value agenda will be going next. Adrian, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everybody. I'm not often introduced as someone's delight, so that's quite a unique experience this morning already. I'd just like to add my welcome to Peter's. It's great to be in such a magnificent venue and with an equally magnificent audience. As Peter said, this is the third outing for our little duo, SE UK and Interserve, so it's great to now be a trio, a three-piece band with business in the community coming on board as well. And just to sort of continue that musical analogy a little bit, the third summit, and Peter's already talked about the journey from Dartington to Coin Street to here, the third summit could be a bit like the sort of tricky third album for a rock band. How do we take this thing forward? Well, I think we've already answered some of that question, but there's a lot of great stuff to come today. But just continuing the musical theme for a moment, I was challenged by someone in my team in preparing for this to answer the question, what's my favourite music? What's my favourite band? The initial response is not repeatable for an audience of this august body, but after a little bit of thought, I came up with, I'm proud to say, Led Zeppelin as the band. I am a man of a certain age. Actually, I'm not. I'm a little bit younger than that. I've got older brothers. They're of a certain age, and they inculcated me into the dark art of Led Zeppelin in the 70s. Anyway, their third album, you can see how it's tricky. It was called Led Zeppelin 3, so I'm obviously struggling with originality. I think it does, though, give us some food for thought for today. The third track on that album is called Celebration Day, and really, I think we've got a lot to celebrate. The Social Value Act that is the sort of piece of legislation that's at the epicentre of a lot of what we're talking about and trying to do, it has had a far-reaching impact across this country, and it's great to hear its reach is spreading beyond these shores. There's another song on that album called Friends. We as Interserve have certainly developed many new friendships in the last few years along this journey with SEUK and business in the community, of course, but also with other like-minded organisations, large and small, people like Groundwork Trust, bounce back, we do print. You know, we're engaged in relationships that we couldn't have seen ourselves in perhaps just a few years ago. And the final track I'll mention is called That's the Way. And we've certainly found new ways to deliver our services with partners from across all sectors, such as those working with us in our justice team, Purple Futures, where we're seeking now to play our part in reducing reoffending. Now, Yvonne Thomas is here and she's speaking later. She leads that part of our business, so I won't steal her thunder. So the Social Value Act, it's not directly causal to what we've been doing because we were pursuing a big agenda of our own through our sustainability plan, but the two things happened around about the same time that we were thinking about our plans for the future at about the same time as the Act was passed. And it has been serendipitous, really, in terms of helping drive a mutual agenda for us and many of our key clients. So, Interserve, a business of 85,000 people around the world, we've been involved in community and public service for well over 100 years. So I hope you wouldn't be surprised that social value or a concept that we now call social value is woven into the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve as a business, which are places that benefit people, public services in the public interest, more skills and more opportunities, a positive environmental impact and sustainable growth. Now, none of those outcomes can be successfully delivered if we don't pursue social value and if we don't track the impact that we're having. And I'll come back to that point about tracking in a moment because I think we've made a lot of headway in that area in the last 12 months. But, you know, I don't really want to spend the time I've got at the lectern focusing solely on what Interserve is doing, nor to look backwards and review what's happened in the last 12 months since our last summit and the review of the Act that Lord Young announced to us on that occasion. What I prefer to do is get us all looking forward and issue a bit of a call to action, actually, for commissioners, for providers, and the wider community to help expand the understanding and the use of social value. And in that respect, we need to be courageous and we need to be working together to create that change. In very simple terms, everyone, I think, in this room knows that a good business or good business means caring about a lot more than just money. You know, we all get that. But I think we could all be doing more if asked, and we should all be doing a lot more to promote the behaviours that underpin that broader definition of what good looks like in business terms. You know, it's a well-established idea. I think we all understand what social value is. Certainly we feel at Interserve we can deliver not only the technical requirements for a contract, but also the valuable social benefits that can flow from the way we design and build our buildings and infrastructure, the way we operate and maintain things. And we also recognise that our business processes and particularly our public service delivery touches not only those at whom those services are aimed, but also many who are indirectly impacted by what we do. So we understand the process, we understand the skills needed to deliver them, and in our case we've got ability and resources to invest to help make those things happen. But personally I'm pretty disappointed actually that we're not being asked to do these things more often, and that we're very rarely judged and measured on our ability to deliver social as well as financial value. In my industry, in our industry, a typical tender document, an inquiry from a prospective customer, and I generalise here to make a point, but it'll start by saying something like, we presently do X, we spend Y on it, and we employ Z number of people to make it happen. We'd like you to do all that, but a bit cheaper, please. And sometimes the enlightened ones as a coder might say, oh, and by the way, if you can make us look good while you're at it, that would be great. Now, it's a gross simplification of an industry that deploys lots of people in complex, time-consuming and costly work-winning and negotiation processes. But I think what is beyond dispute is that the price point of a service is at the core of many decisions, the majority of decisions about who wins and loses business in my sector. What we very rarely see are clients asking us what we could do to reimagine their services, to create systems and processes that are agile and adaptable and therefore future-proof. And nor do we see many of our contracts where the traditional measurements of cost and quality and reliability are seen as just one part of assessing what I think the real point is, which is this activity enhancing the lives of the people that it serves? So challenging as that sort of slightly broader lexicon is, I think we would love to have the chance to answer questions more along the lines of, I've got this much money, what can you give me for that? How can you make things better? That allows us to sell value, to sell imagination, not simply to compete on cost in some sort of race to the bottom. And that approach gets all of us to raise our line of sight as to why and how we're doing what we're doing, rather than just how much of it we're doing and what it costs. Many of our contracts last for a few years, some rather longer. Our relationships with our clients tend to outlive those 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years in some cases. In our experience, lasting relationships are founded on trust, adaptability, and generating a real understanding of what each party wants and can offer the other. So I think for social value to become more embedded in business life, we need to start asking better questions. And as service providers, we need to raise our game in anticipating and responding to those questions. And the sort of questions I'm thinking of are those that embrace that change is inevitable. The sort of questions that allow partnerships to be developed, solutions to be found, and problems to be solved. Because ultimately the problems of operating in a world with scarce natural resources, scarce skills and insight, looking for better community cohesion, these are shared problems, and we all need to see them answered well and sustainably. So, lots of reasons for upping our collective game and positively trying to differentiate ourselves as a service provider that takes social value seriously. But for me, though, there's another set of reasons why this matters, and why we need to be better at demonstrating and articulating our social value proposition. And that really is existential necessity. Big phrase, but I don't think an over-dramatised one. Our world of service provision as an outsourcer is evolving, and if we don't evolve, we'll die. That could come swiftly through some sort of reputational disaster. In some ways, more worryingly, it might come slowly out of irrelevance and obsolescence. So, if I think forward, I find it really hard to imagine that any business that doesn't stand for something about its role in society will survive. Of course, creating shareholder value is the central purpose of any enterprise, understood, but I don't think anymore it's credible, let alone moral, to think of shareholder value in a vacuum without thinking as well around the impact of generating that shareholder value has on the communities and the stakeholders that are affected by our activity. So, whether because we believe in the positives and the opportunities, or in the negatives and the risks, and by the way, I sort of believe in both, I think we need to be pushing the bar upward on what's expected and permitted in the way that services are designed, commissioned, bought, sold, and evaluated and measured. So as a market stimulus, that broader definition of what good looks like, that the social value gives us, I think has enabled much greater competition, and it challenges each of us in the relationships that we're in to be creative and innovative and agile and imaginative, and it promotes services and structures that evolve with the people that use them and pay for them, giving much greater benefit. It gives social entrepreneurs the opportunity to compete with conventional businesses and indeed to collaborate with them, each playing to their strengths. And in that sense, just a couple of words on one or two things that we're doing. I said I wouldn't talk much about Interserve, but we've got a couple of examples that are worth sharing because we're very proud of them. Recently, we were part of a winning team with Big Society Capital, on the Big Society Capital's Business Impact Challenge. We worked with Catch-22 and Club Finance, and our idea is the Public Services Lab. And where that comes from is that in our experience there's quite a gap between the political ambition behind public sector commissioning in this area and the capacity of social business to respond. So the requirements of public procurement need to be de-risked to enable social enterprises to participate more fully. And what the lab will do is provide support for voluntary, charitable and social enterprises to build the skills and get the access to finance so that they can meet the more challenging questions that we expect them to be asked in winning business and in achieving their growth. In a similar vein, maybe on a smaller scale, at the moment we're looking to build the capacity of social enterprises in Yorkshire. In partnership with ASDA, we're leading Business in the Community's ARC programme, which is seeking to create 1,000 jobs and generate social value from the partnership of large and small businesses tackling community and social needs. So, are we in that way growing our future competitors? Well, maybe we are, but we're also using what we've got to help others at no cost, indeed with many benefits to ourselves and to our people. I'd certainly like to think that anyway, we're doing it because we believe in the social value that it creates. So, well done us, but these are relatively small first steps. We want to be asked to do more, and we want to help those who are asking us and who are answering the questions to see better questions. That means an uplifting of the industry to respond, and that in turn requires, I think, increased confidence amongst commissioners to be able to ask those bigger, longer, deeper questions and to be prepared and permitted to make their choices on a much more balanced scorecard of evaluation than just that price point I touched on earlier. I'm going to close now because I've taken too much time, but I promise to come back to tracking. Our sustainability plan that I referred to, it's built around trackable performance, and I'm deliberately using that phrase because we want to understand as well as measure our impact. So last year at the summit, we published our sort of proof of concept design around our social mapping tool, and said we'd update this year, which is going to happen later in the day. But the headline is good news. We've worked hard on this. It's been a great success, and we're now in the production phase, and we'll be soon starting to report both at an individual contract level on the social impact we're having, so our individual customers can understand how what we're doing together jointly impacts on their local community, and we'll be aggregating that into some sort of group-wide statement on our social impact, which I think will be very positive and for us. So watch this space. But to conclude, we certainly feel we can do more if we're asked. We want to. I think we have to. And certainly at Interserve, we're building capacity across sectors to answer those questions and deliver on the social value agenda. The outcomes, I believe, that we're building are flexible and agile partnerships that can achieve enduring success in this fast-changing world. But my hope is that we're building trust, because with trust comes social value. Can't do it by ourselves, which is where you all come in. So step up, please. Have a great day. Thank you for your time.
Well, there you have it. As I was reflecting, this agenda does require leadership, but I think it's fantastic that you have the chief exec of a multi-billion, multinational pound company pleading with commissioners and procurement officials to ask for more from contracting, asking for more from tenders. And I think that hopefully with boldness and braveness, and as more certainty emerges into the market, we'll see a bit more bold commissioning taking place. With another kind of macro perspective of what's happening in the world of business, particularly around this agenda, I'm really, really delighted that our next speaker has probably no better black book than exists in the world of business. Having been the chief exec of Business in the Community, I suspect, Stephen, you know just about every chief exec of every FTSE 100 company and beyond. I suspect they're all on speed dial in your mobile phone. Stephen, I can remember a conversation with Chris White at Breakfast Round Table a few months ago, where you were saying that this agenda still isn't necessarily getting as deep onto the radar as it should be, and that a very significant number of your large members are not reporting seeing a significant trend towards social value procurement and commissioning, and that there's still so much further to go. However, I think we would all recognise that this is an agenda that should galvanise political leadership, business leadership, and social sector leadership too. And so I'm really, really encouraged and keen to find out what your observations are about where this agenda will go next. The government made a commitment. They endorsed Lord Young's recommendations before the last election around the social value review, who you heard from last year. One of the recommendations was another review in 18 months. Can you believe we're only 6 months away from another Social Value Act review? I don't know what's going to come out of that. Again, as a group of individuals and organisations that are committed to this agenda, I think we should really be very proactive in putting forward some good ideas to the Minister and to the Cabinet Office about where next for the Social Value Act and the agenda. Stephen, over to you.
Well, Peter, thank you for that, and Adrian, thank you for including me this morning, but more importantly, thank you for your important leadership in this space. It really does matter. I thought I would spend a few minutes this morning just reflecting on what I'm hearing, feeling, seeing in the business community out there, both the frustrations and perhaps the glimpses of hope that we see in this agenda. But first, Adrian, as you were taking us on our nostalgia tour of rock and roll, I was reminded of being at the opening night of the Rolling Stones reunion tour a couple of years ago at the O2. So picture this, 20-some thousand old, overweight people in leather trousers. You can't shake that image. I'm sorry I've done that to you this morning. But as we think about, and you both alluded to it, this sort of economic, social, political volatility that we're feeling right now, both home and abroad, let me start with one of my all-time favorite quotes, and I think it's relevant to this time, and this is from Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, and it was the age of foolishness. It was the spring of hope, and it was the winter of despair. And I feel that as I go through the morning papers, even today, looking at what's going on in the world, what the Chancellor calls this dangerous cocktail of risks that we're seeing out there, the slowdown in China, the crisis in Syria, the refugee impact that that's having around the world, the tensions we're having more close to home on the EU and other issues. It never seems to get any calmer or any easier, does it? Watching the election results in the United States a couple of nights ago, the impact that populists are having in this country, around Europe, and certainly in the United States. And Mr. Trump comes to mind. Who can we blame? And let's blame the immigrants, whoever they are. By the way, probably most of us in this room are immigrants. The economists are telling us that over the next several years, 5 to 10 million good, skills-driven, middle-class jobs are going to be replaced by robots. Okay, a few new jobs will be created along the way, but what we're looking at is quite a massive social dislocation that's coming. And for those of you who were in central London yesterday and saw the taxi cab strike, hundreds and hundreds of cabs blocking main arteries, not only do black cabs suffer this, but every organization in the land, including yours, runs the risk of getting Ubered right now as technology begins to change the way everything is done. We heard it in Davos, this whole big debate about the fourth industrial revolution and what is the impact of, and some of the things that are going to come up today. Big data, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence. The list goes on of things I don't understand, but are here to stay and are going to have quite a profound impact on all of this. So all of this throws into this sort of milieu of issues. How do we respond? What are the big issues that are out there? What are the things that could hit us? The world of work is changing at pace, and standing here as one of the older people in the room, perhaps, looking at the aging population that we have and the need that so many will have through their career to have to reset the skills button, begin to think again about what are the skills they're going to need. I mean, those of you with young children at home will no doubt be thinking, what do we need to do to prepare them? What are the actual skills that they're going to need beyond resilience and some of the soft skills we can teach them? A very difficult question to ask. And then, as Peter challenged me, so where's the business community on all this and how are they feeling? Well, there's a palpable sense of frustration out there. The media wants to focus on tax, and primarily tax on profits and executive pay. Not that those aren't important issues and provocative issues, but they tend to take us off the beam a little bit, I think, when we think about the value that business can add. So when I try to think about the role that business can play and how we engage leaders to think about this, I try to go right back to the very beginning. What is the purpose of their business? Is the purpose of their business just to maximize shareholder value in the short term? Well, some people think that. But reality shows us that if that's your purpose, you're not going to last very long. The purpose of your organization, whether you're a big listed company like Adrian's or a social enterprise like many in the room, if you aren't also creating customer value, community value, colleague value, it doesn't work. And so when you begin to think about value measured in a slightly different way, when you begin to differentiate between cost and value, the two are related, but they're not the same thing. It begins to tease out the fundamental issues of this whole social value add concept and how we can and should be working with it. As Peter said, I'm nearing the finish line of what will have been 11 wonderful years at business in the community. Before that, having spent 15 years as CEO of some global businesses. So I've had the experience on both sides of the fence of turning these, however noble sounding and quite simple ideas into practice and realize just how difficult it is to change long-standing behavior patterns, both as a buyer and a seller of products and services that we go through all that. But I'm also acutely aware, as I sit in the vantage point that I'm privileged to have today, of seeing this increasing social divide between the haves and the have-nots, the social inequality that's tearing many of our communities apart, both in the UK and around the world. And the likelihood, as we think about those 5 to 10 million jobs that are going and the other pressures that are happening out there, that those are going to increase. So how does all of this come together? What does that mean in practical terms? And what's holding us back on this whole idea of the social value add? When I spend time with business leaders, and I am privileged to do that a lot, I've not met one yet that doesn't want to do the right thing. I've also not met one yet that isn't a bit frustrated with government, with the customers, sometimes with their own employees, with the pace of change, and those are just natural human tendencies. So we began to think about, so what is it that we can do to unlock that? How can we help businesses think in a broader way about the impact they have? And then more importantly, how do you turn that into a value-creating proposition? What we're challenging businesses to do in this whole social value concept isn't to be good neighbors and philanthropic. Yes, there are that as well, but it's how to create a better business that is more sustainable through the ups and downs of this uncertain, turbulent world that we live in. How do you, in the process of generating value, treat the planet, treat your colleagues, treat your communities in ways that will resonate back to you? How do you create value, in other words, by living your values? And you say that to somebody and they instinctively go, yeah, I get that, I'm with you on that. But then they always ask the question, well, how? And one of the ways that we do that, and I point to what Adrian and Tim and the Interserve team are doing so well, how do you turn that into numbers and practical outcomes and things that you can measure that are real? Companies want to have good community engagement. They want to make a difference out there, but how do they prove it? And how do they do it in a way that's credible? Because, by the way, none of us are trusted out there in the media right now, and that lack of trust is likely to be with us, if not forever, at least for some time. So, well, there are a number of ways. The environment that you're having this discussion today, the conversations you're going to have a little bit later around big versus small, local versus national, cost versus value, all the things that sort of tease at the heart of this issue are here in spades. Devolution, austerity, some of the other macroeconomic trends aren't changing for several years, and perhaps for several more beyond that. That's the bad news. The good news is, what I'm certainly hearing is this whole idea of social action, social value is on everyone's lips and minds. People are thinking about it. They don't quite know what to do with it. I mean, it is a truism that politicians are rewarded not for avoiding problems, but for fixing problems. And so we have a natural tendency as governments to only deal with things when they've gotten to that problem state. And we don't celebrate and reward and incentivize people to deal with things before they become problems. That's where I think the business and the social enterprise community has a role to play. We think, you think, beyond borders, beyond election cycles, think about the impact and value, both internal and external, you have in a slightly different way. And that's where it begins to come together. We were posed, I guess by you, Peter, with the question, if there was one thing we were going to change to impact the momentum and movement that we're talking about here today, what would that be? Trained as a lawyer, so I can't just say one thing. So 3 parts of one thing, perhaps. And it is what companies are screaming out for in this space. So clarity, consistency, and leadership. How do we develop some ideas that allow us to measure and manage things in a slightly different way? How do we come up with tools and templates that we can use? A bank of indicators that both are credible and can be assessed and measured against us and internally measured over time so we see we're making progress, and in a way that others will believe it and look at it. We have tried at Business in the Community with many of the companies in this room to come up with some templates and tools that companies can use, that you can measure, that you can actually verify, that you can have assured. It isn't all the answer, but I would encourage you to think about that and look at that a little bit. But probably the most important part of all of this is leadership. And the challenge that I'm giving to all of us, to all leaders that I speak with, particularly those in the procurement side of things, whether it's local authorities and their leadership, or whether it's companies thinking about how to manage their own supply chain. It is embrace the implementation of this idea and empower your teams to do it. There isn't a leader that doesn't agree this is the right thing to do, but somehow by the time you get to the person whose job is being measured by driving down costs and procuring pencils or whatever it is that their patch is, somehow that message hasn't gotten there. So how do we unlock all of this? When I look at the scale of what a company or a local authority's purchasing power is through their procurement versus what their community investment spend is over here, the two are dwarfed. So when we begin to think about how do we really drive community impact and change, how do we think about the big issues of the day and how do we encourage the solutions to those, it is the behavior through procurement officers that will really drive that. And so I think that's a critically important part of all this. So what are companies telling us and me? They are absolutely up for this. They are willing and enthusiastic participants. Many say, I've tried and I failed. People don't really seem to care, don't want to know. Well, I'm not sure that's completely true, but I'm also seeing those glimpses of potential out there that say, when you capture it right, when you show the real impact of not just performing the service that you're providing or building the building that you've offered to build for the city of Birmingham, whoever it is, not only have you done a good job and delivered what you promised, but you've also left a positive trail behind in terms of skills development, opportunities, activities within the local communities, etc. Those are the things that people are increasingly getting excited about. And Peter mentioned by getting involved with this newish but quite powerful organization called Power to Change, and it's got me excited about what are some of the new models and ideas of creating community value and community activity. And they're all about community-owned business, community-owned assets. How do you make sure that things really do feel local in this time of devolution and local ownership? How do we get whole communities together, not just through grants, but through creating social enterprises and businesses that actually have legs and can go forward? So we have been given quite a substantial chunk of lottery money to think about how we can both seed a market, provide some grant support in the beginning, celebrate the examples that are happening, get more things happening out there that more people can participate in. And I get encouraged by that. So, am I an optimist or a pessimist in this space? I'm an optimist. Trained as a lawyer, so not many of us think, but an optimist. And the reason being is that people want this to happen. It hasn't happened yet, but they want it to happen. And ultimately, I guess I had a long conversation with one of my sons last night about success. And you probably have these conversations within your own family a little bit. And how do you measure success? A little bit. And when I think about the context that we're talking about today, I come back to this idea over and over again that the success of our communities, the success of the community that you live in now, isn't measured by house prices or share prices, as relevant as those may be. Isn't measured by how clever someone is in keeping their costs down, but it's measured by the character of the people that live there, men and women who work hard and dream big, who love their families, who serve their neighbors, who are creating opportunities for others, who are adding value back. That's what creates the success in the communities. And that's really at the heart of what we're talking about here. How do we encourage people to do the right thing? How do we reward them for doing the right thing? And how do we measure that to kind of keep everybody's feet to the fire? Thank you very much.
Stephen, you said that business leaders are looking for clarity, consistency, and leadership. I'd like to thank you both for providing all of those three things. I think it's about time you got involved in the discussions and the debates. So in a couple of minutes, I'm going to see if there are any kind of starting questions for the day. Try and make them big, challenging questions that will help set the tone for the rest of today's conversations, dialogue, and debate. Before we do that, I think it's wise to reflect that here we are, actually in the borough of Camden. Camden, one of the first London boroughs to become a living wage council under the leadership of Sarah Haywood. Which means that all contracts, all subcontracts and supply chains now have to meet living wage guarantees. So there is something beginning to happen, and although things like living wage criteria might for some be a bit too clunky and blunt, there clearly is an ambition and an aspiration that tier one providers, supply chains, economic activity is in harmony with the social objectives that our political leadership have for our communities and neighbourhoods. And actually how we tease that out, who wins and who succeeds within this new agenda is going to be, I'm sure, absolutely fascinating. What we've already seen is that there are plenty of winning organisations out there that are finding that this new environment is conducive to them winning business and growing. We're also hearing some stories that actually some great businesses that have had fantastic track records of doing very, very important and cost-effective interventions within their communities are actually losing out in this new kind of world of commissioning and procurement and the complexities of the new landscape in which we work. There will be many, many challenges, but it's actually only by coming together that we will resolve these. And it's actually only by fostering the partnerships that have emerged through things like the Social Value Summit, now in its third year, that will actually help foster and develop the solutions that we're all so keen to see develop. So there is the opportunity to have coffee before the next session to begin. I believe that there isn't a hard printed programme. There is now an app that's been developed, which I'm sure you've all downloaded, which will help you navigate around this very, very kind of rolling building. It's you're going to do your 10,000 steps today, probably before lunchtime, no doubt. So do we have any questions to kick off? Any observations? What are you hoping to get out of today? There's a gentleman there. Can I just get a mic to the 5th floor? And then I'm going to come over to the lady on the front. And then I think we'll probably have enough of questions and move on for coffee. But sir, starting with you, can you tell us your name and where you're from?
Yes, James Trotter from Amy. Peter, you challenged, said one of the things you're looking forward to today is the David Goliath moment. And I'm actually going to ask Adrian how a large business like his has a role to play in embracing and bringing together the smaller community.
Well, we're really part of a continuum of organising and getting things done. Some of that we do ourselves, but a huge amount of it we have and we always have done in partnership with other organisations of all sizes and shapes. And I think our role of sort of wrapping the output for our customer is only one part of generating the outcome that customer wants, and that's how we see it. So we see ourselves as part of a process, not the be all and end all of it, and without a supply chain that is willing and able and sufficiently equipped with all the necessary resources, we're nothing. Receiving a present that's beautifully wrapped, gift wrapped, but actually is an empty box, isn't really very satisfying. And in that sense, we're the box and the wrapping paper. We're not necessarily the substance of the service. So I think it's a very sort of fundamental point about how you see yourself and being real about what your value add is. Our value add is coordination, wrap, risk management, and the financial resources that go with that, but not necessarily all the expertise and the specific deliverables. That's where our partners, our supplier chain comes in, and they can be of any size and shape. Does that help answer the question?
I think it answers. Steve, I just wondered if you had anything to add to that. Does a world where costs are constantly under pressure mean that we are naturally going to see an upscaling of contracts and arrangements that does, in effect, favour the large over the small?
Well, there is a structural advantage for the big guys. And you see it whether it's in the kind of procurement we're talking about here all the way to the coffee shops on the high street. But the flip side of that is all the evidence tells us that we collectively trust the small guys more than we trust the big guys. So as I'm talking to companies about how do you make this real? How do you differentiate yourself? How do you think about how you tangibly show whoever your customer is why it's in their best interest to use you? Thinking about how you can engage local works. So my message to companies, I guess, Peter, when they're complaining that they aren't getting the clarity they need from their customers, is to say, well, give it back to the customer. Develop an example of what you do and why it adds value and how you engage large and small in that supply chain. Because we're all interested in buying local right now, and that's going to help win business.
Thank you. And the lady in the front.
Hello there, my name's Pam. I'm a CEO of Femora, which is a deaf-led social enterprise. Social value is extremely important to us, especially because of the barriers that deaf people face in everyday life. It can be quite intimidating being deaf and in an environment such as this where you are the only deaf person. But it's important to recognise that hearing people have a lot more opportunity. Even the organisations down to the service users have more opportunity. So I think it's quite important for those organisations to acknowledge that there are organisations such as ours that need that partnership, need that relationship in order to provide social value on a bigger scale. So we need more people to work with us to enable us to work with the deaf community, and it is an issue at the moment. So if you have any suggestions, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
You know, I wouldn't often describe people as potentially being redundant assets, but there are lots of redundant assets, from people to buildings to all sorts of opportunities that exist in our communities that are currently underutilised. I think we all recognise that, whether that's people with sensory disabilities or people on the autistic spectrum. There are a range of kind of opportunities that we are not fully utilising or releasing the potential of. How do we do this? I mean, is this the role of business, or should this, are we mixing up the kind of role of government and society with the role of business? What is the opportunity for mainstreaming diverse and disadvantaged communities through business?
Well, let me have a go at that, Peter. Adrian will want to say something as well. In my mind, the way that we get business leaders engaged on this is we show them how this is going to make their business better. Every organization is in the so-called war for talent. How do we find the best people? How do we unlock the best in those people? How do we make sure that our staff represents the community that we're selling to or servicing? How do you do this? So there is a real, I think, a business opportunity in getting the right people doing the right things in there. I think the other corollary to that, and it was raised by the question, is that frequently businesses don't know how to do that, or they don't quite know where to start, or it feels too complicated, or it's going to take too long and I only get to keep my job for 3 years kind of thing. So part of it is, how can we help create partnerships, collaborations that make this easier, that show that by bringing people in who look different, sound different from what the norm is, how that really adds value and how we can support them in that process. And it can be everywhere from people with disabilities to people who have found themselves long-term unemployed and perhaps even homeless, or institutionalized because they've been in the armed forces for so long they don't quite know how to reacclimate to Civvy Street. For the businesses to invest a little time and energy to help them acclimate can pay some really quite substantial dividends in the quality of the people and the loyalty they get, in my view. I
guess disability can, be viewed as, something that actually provides a unique perspective and additional skills, and we should perhaps see these things as not necessarily a loss, but actually additionality, perhaps. Adrian, did you want to come in on the role of business in trying to find, useful routes for people that are disadvantaged?
Yeah, I mean, primarily, I just echo everything Stephen's just said. We certainly have a role to play, not the only role to play, and we do not have. I don't think there are any silver bullets here. I think this is lots of small steps. Certainly, it starts with that mindset that I'm going to judge this book by more than the cover. Here today, whether you walked or came on the bus, but I think you've had a fantastic return on investment on whatever it cost you, because you've just put your organisation on the map with 200 more people. So well done, and thank you for raising the point.
Indeed. Guy, I'm going to take a final question, and then we're going to head off for coffee. There will be plenty of time throughout the day to get your questions in, and I'm glad that you're so enthusiastic with your questioning this early on in the programme. But Guy, let's hear from you.
Guy Battle, Social Value Portal. So we heard both from Stephen and Adrian sort of very open sort of challenge to a certain extent, and acceptance that business wants to do more, which is fantastic, and a challenge to, I guess, the public sector to say, be bolder, ask for more, but in that you want transparency, you want consistency, and you want leadership. We're working with a number of local authorities at the moment, and one of the challenges they are facing is obviously cuts in budgets, 60% cuts between 2012 and 2019. So massive, dramatic cuts. We've heard today about Camerons fighting for all this stuff. The public sector needs absolute assurance that if they push this social value agenda, it's actually not going to cost them more. And there's a real fear at the moment within the public sector that if we put social value clauses in there, this is going to lead to higher costs as opposed to reduce costs and more value. Everyone can see the value, but they're really worried about this. And I think it's really important that business understands that and actually goes out of its way to prove that this is going to cost less, or at least cost no more to deliver.
Our Communities Count report, Guy, I think it was published with a variety of partners, CIH, PwC, Orbit Housing and others, absolutely recognise that more than 50% of commissioners and procurement officials that were using social value frameworks were realising cost savings. We're not seeing an addition in price, but actually seeing cost reductions emerge. And again, I think that we are beginning to see more and more evidence emerge that actually when you link social objectives and economic objectives together, actually you can find all sorts of efficiencies that do achieve better value for money. And one of the benefits of my jobs is visiting social enterprises around the country who see and develop the most astonishing opportunities to do things differently. And I think it was a point that was made earlier on by one of you gentlemen that was very much about, this is not simply about doing the same old stuff with a few additional burdens. This is about being given the opportunity to reimagine and redesign and revision the way we deliver services. But any final thoughts on that point from Guy Battle around the challenge of delivering this agenda in a period of austerity?
I mean, personally, I empathise with the pressure under which these people are operating, but they're asking themselves the wrong question. If it's just about, if you think in terms of what something costs, you stand back, why are we providing local services in this local area? We're doing it to generate prosperity, quality of life, and if social value measures like how much of the economic input into this activity are we sourcing from this postcode, this borough, if that isn't relevant to answering the question or addressing that fundamental purpose of why are we here, then I don't know what is. So if that's the way the exam question is being framed, to my mind, those people need to go and get a fresh career break because they're doing nobody a public service.
Well, what a great way to end, Steve. I don't know if you can top that.
But that's just what
for the cynics and doubters, go and get a different job. I think we should finish on that note. I think coffee is served. Good luck finding your way around this beautiful building. There are plenty of staff from Interserve, from our partners for these events, and from Social Enterprise UK and BITC that can guide you around the building should you get lost. Enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the grandeur of the facilities and the grounds around you, and I look forward to lots of exciting and interesting dialogue throughout the rest of the day. Thank you.